He couldn't believe it when his twin boys shouted, "Dad!" He finally realized the girl that night was Josephine. "Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. I want to start by thanking you all for the incredible love and support you've shown on my last videos. You're not just viewers, you're my true family, and I'm so grateful for each of you. Today, I'm speaking to you with a very heavy heart. I'm not feeling well, and it's not just physical. My soul feels shattered. Every time I close my eyes, I see my dear friend, someone so full of life, now gone forever. They lost their life in Los Angeles, and the pain is unbearable. It's hard to find the strength to sit here and speak, but I feel I owe it to them, to share this moment with you, my family. Please pray for me, for them, and for everyone who's grieving right now. Let's move forward with today's story, but I warn you, it's with tears in my eyes and sadness in my heart. The grand opening of Genesis Tower sparkled against Manhattan's skyline on a crisp October evening, but nothing shone brighter than Josephine Carter's smile as she adjusted her emerald gown in the penthouse suite's floor-to-ceiling mirror. The silk fabric whispered against her skin as she smoothed invisible wrinkles, a nervous habit she'd carried since childhood. As the lead architect of the project, she had earned her place among New York's elite, though the weight of being one of the few black women in her position never fully left her shoulders. Her dark skin glowed under the crystal chandeliers, turning heads as she gracefully navigated through the crowd. At 27, she had already made a name for herself in a field dominated by older white men, and tonight was the culmination of 3 years of relentless work and unwavering determination. The reflection that gazed back at her told a story of persistence and grace. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Stand tall, baby girl. Your ancestors walked so you could run." The elegant coils of her natural hair were styled in an intricate updo, adorned with delicate gold pins that matched the subtle architectural patterns embroidered along the hem of her gown. Each element of her appearance was a carefully chosen statement, a bridge between her heritage and the modern world she helped shape. Even her jewelry, carved ivory bangles passed down from her grandmother Phoenix, spoke of the tradition she carried into every boardroom and design meeting. The Genesis Tower wasn't just another skyscraper. It was Josephine's masterpiece, her declaration to the world that excellence knows no color or gender. Its innovative design incorporated sustainable technologies with African-inspired architectural elements, creating a structure that both honored her heritage and pushed the boundaries of modern architecture. The sweeping curves of the building's exterior mimicked the flow of traditional African textiles, while the interior spaces were filled with warm woods and geometric patterns that paid homage to her grandmother Phoenix's Ghanaian roots. Each floor told a story, from the lobby's soaring ceilings adorned with contemporary interpretations of Adinkra symbols to the meditation gardens on the mid-level floors that recreated the tranquil spaces of her grandmother's stories. The building itself seemed to dance in the fading sunlight, its glass and steel facade shifting colors like the scales of a mighty serpent. Josephine had insisted on using a special coating on the windows that not only maximized energy efficiency, but also created an iridescent effect that changed throughout the day. In the morning, the tower caught the sunrise and seemed to glow with inner fire. At sunset, it reflected the sky's colors like a prism, painting the surrounding streets with rainbow light. Local artists had already begun setting up their easels on nearby corners, capturing the building's ever-changing face. As she moved through the crowd of New York's most influential people, Josephine couldn't help but reflect on her journey. Growing up in Chicago's South Side, she'd spent countless hours sketching buildings in the margins of her notebooks, dreaming of creating spaces that would touch the sky. Her mother had worked double shifts as a nurse to put her through architecture school, and her grandmother Phoenix had filled her head with stories of African palaces and the power of creating spaces that spoke to the soul. "Ms. Carter," a voice called out, and she turned to see Harrison Wells, one of the project's investors. "The observation deck is absolutely stunning. The way you've incorporated those traditional patterns into the glasswork, brilliant." Josephine smiled graciously, launching into an explanation of how she'd worked with artisans from Ghana to create the custom glass panels. As she spoke, she felt a shift in the energy of the room, a subtle change in the atmosphere that drew her attention toward the main entrance. That's when she saw him, Lyndon Fern, the young CEO of Fern Industries. At 31, he had already transformed his father's real estate company into a global force in sustainable development. He moved through the crowd with an easy confidence, his tall frame cutting an impressive figure in a perfectly tailored black suit. His dark hair was styled precisely, and even from across the room, she could see the intensity in his striking blue eyes. Their gazes met across the crowded space, and the world seemed to pause. The champagne glasses clinked, the music played, and hundreds of conversations continued around them. But in that moment, everything else faded into the background. There was something in his look that spoke of recognition, not of her face, but of her soul. Josephine turned back to her conversation, but she could feel his presence drawing closer. Her heart began to beat faster, and she silently chided herself for acting like a schoolgirl instead of the accomplished professional she was. She had dealt with countless powerful men in her career. This should be no different. But it was different, and she knew it the moment he spoke. "The architect who's been giving my board members sleepless nights." His voice was deep and smooth, like aged whiskey. He offered her a glass of champagne, his fingers brushing hers as she accepted it. "I must say, your vision exceeded all expectations." "Mr. Fern," she acknowledged, meeting his gaze steadily. "I hope those sleepless nights will be worth it when the environmental impact reports come in. We're projecting a 60% reduction in energy consumption compared to traditional buildings of this size." His eyes lit up with genuine interest. "Please, call me Lyndon. And yes, that's exactly the kind of innovation we need in this industry. Though I must admit, it's not just the technical specifications that impressed me. The way you've woven cultural elements into a modern design, it's revolutionary." They fell into an easy conversation about architecture, sustainability, and their shared vision for the future of urban development. Lyndon wasn't just another wealthy CEO. He was passionate and knowledgeable about his field, challenging her ideas and offering insights that showed a deep understanding of both the creative and technical aspects of construction. As the evening progressed, they found themselves drawn to the rooftop garden she had designed. The space was her pride and joy, a hanging garden that seemed to float above the city. Indigenous plants from various African countries were arranged in patterns that told stories, just as her grandmother had taught her that traditional African gardens did. "This is extraordinary," Lyndon said, running his hand along a railing she had designed to mimic the pattern of Adinkra symbols. "Would you tell me the story behind these patterns?" Josephine felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the champagne. She began explaining the significance of each symbol, how they represented concepts like wisdom, strength, and unity. As she spoke, she noticed how intently he listened, how his eyes never left her face, how he seemed to be drinking in not just her words, but her passion for her culture and her work. The city lights twinkled below them like fallen stars, and a gentle breeze carried the sweet scent of night-blooming jasmine she had insisted on including in the garden. They moved closer to the edge, looking out over the glittering expanse of Manhattan. "You know," Lyndon said softly, "when I first reviewed your proposal for this project, I knew you were talented. But standing here now, seeing how you've brought your vision to life, it's beyond anything I could have imagined." Josephine turned to face him, suddenly very aware of how close they were standing. The light from the garden's subtle illumination cast soft shadows across his face, highlighting the strength of his jaw and the warmth in his eyes. In that moment, they weren't CEO and architect. They weren't their titles or achievements or responsibilities. They were just two souls, drawn together by fate, standing in a garden that seemed to exist somewhere between earth and sky. Sometimes, she found herself saying, the most beautiful things come from taking risks, from daring to be different. Like incorporating traditional African design elements into a Manhattan skyscraper, he asked, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Like having a deep conversation with a client on a rooftop garden instead of networking downstairs, she countered, returning his smile. His hand found hers on the railing, and the touch sent electricity through her body. I think, he said, his voice low and intimate, that some risks are worth taking. The string quartet's music drifted up from the ballroom below, and without speaking, they began to sway together. It wasn't quite dancing. It was something more natural, more intimate. The night air wrapped around them like a blanket, and the rest of the world seemed to fade away until all that existed was this moment, this connection that seemed to transcend their brief acquaintance. As they moved together under the stars, neither of them could have known how this night would change their lives forever. They couldn't have known about the twins who would inherit Lyndon's intense gaze and Josephine's creative spirit, or about the years of separation and longing that lay ahead. In that moment, they were simply two people finding something unexpected and beautiful in each other, writing the first lines of a story that would take years to fully unfold. The champagne bubbles danced in their glasses. The jasmine perfumed the air, and somewhere in the distance, a clock struck midnight. But on that rooftop garden, time seemed to stand still, holding its breath as Lyndon and Josephine's lives intertwined under the vast canopy of the New York sky. Chapter 2. Dawn's Goodbye. The first hints of dawn painted Manhattan's sky in watercolor shades of pink and gold as Josephine stood in Lyndon's penthouse bathroom, her hands gripping the marble countertop. Her reflection in the mirror told the story of a night she would never forget, her carefully styled hair now loose around her shoulders, her lipstick faded, her emerald gown slightly creased. But it was her eyes that captured her attention. They held a new light, a mixture of joy and something that looked dangerously like hope. The silence of early morning wrapped around her like a blanket, broken only by the soft sound of Lyndon's breathing from the bedroom. She'd left him sleeping, his strong features softened by dreams, one arm still reaching for the space she'd occupied. The intimacy of their night together had been more than physical. They'd shared dreams, fears, and ambitions in whispered conversations that stretched into the small hours. He'd told her about losing his father at 16, about the pressure of taking over the family empire so young. She'd shared stories of her grandmother Phoenix's influence on her work, of the nights spent studying architectural drawings by lamplight while her classmates partied. But reality had a way of creeping in with the morning light. As Josephine gathered her things, her phone buzzed with an email from Harrison Wells, one of the project's senior investors. "Extraordinary work at the opening, Ms. Carter. Though I couldn't help but notice you and young Fern seemed quite taken with each other. Remember, reputation is everything in our business." The words hit her like a bucket of ice water. She'd seen it before, how quickly people could dismiss a black woman's achievements, how eager they were to attribute her success to anything but her talent and hard work. The whispers would start, the black architect sleeping her way to the top. Never mind her degrees, her awards, the countless nights she'd spent perfecting every detail of Genesis Tower. One night of following her heart could unravel everything she'd fought so hard to build. Her grandmother Phoenix's words echoed in her mind. "Baby girl, in this world, you got to be twice as good to get half as far. And when you get there, you got to be twice as careful to stay." Phoenix had built her own interior design business from nothing, facing discrimination at every turn. She'd taught Josephine that success wasn't just about talent, it was about strategy, about choosing your battles, about knowing when to stand firm and when to step back. Josephine's fingers traced the delicate gold chain around her neck, her mother's graduation gift, a reminder of all the sacrifices made to get her here. Her mother had worked double shifts as a nurse, had gone without so Josephine could have the best education. "You're going to build towers that touch the sky," she'd always said. "Don't let anyone or anything stop you." The sound of movement from the bedroom made her heart race. She could picture Lyndon waking up, those intense blue eyes searching for her. Part of her ached to stay, to crawl back into bed and see where this connection could lead. Last night, wrapped in his arms, she'd allowed herself to imagine a future. Private dinners in rooftop gardens, passionate discussions about sustainable architecture, building something beautiful together in every sense of the word. But the pragmatic part of her, the part that had navigated her way through a white male-dominated industry, knew better. Lyndon's world of old money and societal expectations was one thing, but her reality as a black woman in architecture was another. She'd worked too hard, come too far to let anyone question her success or her integrity. Moving silently through the penthouse, Josephine gathered her evening bag and shoes. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of the city waking up, delivery trucks making their rounds, early morning joggers in Central Park, lights beginning to flicker off in office buildings. Her own Genesis Tower stood proud against the lightening sky, its innovative design a testament to her vision and determination. She paused at Lyndon's desk, elegant Mont Blanc pen in hand. Words failed her as she stared at the cream-colored notepad. What could she say? That last night had meant everything and nothing, that in another world, another time, they might have had something extraordinary? In the end, she simply wrote, "Thank you for a beautiful night. Please understand. J." The note felt inadequate, but anything more would make this harder than it already was. She took one last look at the bedroom door, remembering how Lyndon had kissed her there just hours ago, how his hands had traced the architecture of her body with the same reverence she gave to her designs, the memory of his whispered words. "You're extraordinary, Josephine," threatened to weaken her resolve. The early morning doorman tipped his hat as she crossed the lobby, her high heels clicking against the marble floor. Outside, the October air was crisp, carrying the promise of autumn. A few yellow cabs prowled the streets, and Josephine raised her hand to hail one, grateful that the city was still quiet enough that few would notice a woman in evening wear making her way home as dawn broke. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, Josephine allowed herself one glance back at the building. Somewhere up there, Lyndon Fern was sleeping, unaware that she was slipping out of his life as quietly as she'd entered it. She couldn't know then that she carried more than just memories of their night together, that in her womb 2 new lives were beginning to form, lives that would bind her to Lyndon Fern in ways she couldn't imagine. The taxi driver caught her eye in the rearview mirror. "Long night?" he asked kindly. Josephine managed a small smile. "Just the end of a beautiful dream," she replied, watching the city scroll past her window. She had meetings later that day, designs to review, a career to protect. She would throw herself into her work, push this night to the back of her mind, file it away with other beautiful but impossible things. But as the taxi wound its way through the awakening city, Josephine's hand drifted unconsciously to her stomach, where 2 tiny hearts had already begun to beat in time with her own. The universe, it seemed, had other plans for her carefully ordered life. In the months to come, she would discover that some goodbyes are really just beginnings in disguise, and that the most beautiful designs often come from life's unexpected blueprints. The morning sun finally broke through the buildings, catching the windows of Genesis Tower and setting them ablaze with light. Josephine watched her creation shine in the distance, unaware that she had just begun her greatest project yet, one that would take 6 years to complete and would require more courage, love, and strength than any building she had ever designed. Chapter 3. Twin Blessings. The Chicago winter wind howled outside the Victorian-style home in Hyde Park as Josephine sat in her grandmother Phoenix's sunroom, surrounded by potted plants and the comforting scent of brewing herb tea. At 5 months pregnant, her body was changing in ways that no architectural blueprint could have prepared her for. The morning sickness that had plagued her first trimester had finally subsided, replaced by a strange sense of peace and an even stranger craving for her grandmother's spicy jollof rice at midnight. "Twins," Phoenix said for perhaps the 100th time, her weathered hands resting on Josephine's growing belly. "I knew it the moment you walked through that door, baby girl. Your aura was glowing twice as bright." At 72, Phoenix Carter remained a force of nature, her silver dreadlocks wrapped in a colorful head tie, her traditional Ghanaian dress a riot of vibrant patterns that seemed to dance in the filtered sunlight. The day Josephine had discovered she was carrying twins still played in her mind like a scene from someone else's life. The ultrasound technician's excited voice, the sound of 2 distinct heartbeats filling the room, the grainy image on the screen showing 2 perfect profiles. She'd gripped the examination table so hard her knuckles turned white, tears streaming down her face as she realized the magnitude of what was happening. "Your grandfather was a twin," Phoenix continued, pouring more of her special pregnancy tea into Josephine's cup. The blend of ginger, peppermint, and native African herbs had been passed down through generations of their family. In our culture, twins are considered a blessing from the ancestors. They bring double the joy, double the wisdom. Josephine sipped the tea, her free hand absently sketching in her ever-present notebook. These days, her architectural drawings often morphed into tiny faces, trying to imagine what her sons would look like. Would they have Lyndon's intense blue eyes, her full lips? The thought of Lyndon sent a familiar ache through her chest. Her career had continued to flourish even after her sudden departure from New York. She'd transferred to her firm's Chicago office, citing family reasons, and her reputation had actually grown stronger. The Genesis Tower project had won multiple awards, and she'd been featured in several architectural magazines. Each time she saw her photo in print, she wondered if Lyndon would see it, if he ever thought about their night together. "You're thinking about him again," Phoenix observed, her wise eyes missing nothing. "The father." "I see him everywhere, Grandma," Josephine admitted, running her hand over her swollen belly. "In every blueprint I review, every building I pass. Sometimes I pick up the phone to call him, but you're scared," Phoenix finished gently. "Scared of what people will say, scared of losing everything you've built." She reached out and took Josephine's hand. "Let me tell you something about building, child. The strongest foundations aren't always the ones made of concrete and steel. Sometimes they're built with truth, with courage, with love." Josephine's eyes filled with tears. "I can't risk it, Grandma. You've seen how this industry works. One hint of scandal and they'll tear down everything I've achieved. They won't see a talented architect who happened to fall in love for one night. They'll see a black woman who slept her way to success." Phoenix's face softened with understanding. She'd faced similar prejudices in her own career as an interior designer in the 1970s. "Then we'll do what our people have always done," she said firmly. "We'll make our own way. These babies will know love, strength, and pride. They'll know their father through your stories, and one day, when the time is right, truth will find its way into the light." The months that followed seemed to flow like a river, each day bringing new changes and challenges. Josephine continued working from home, designing sustainable housing projects for underserved communities while her belly grew rounder. She'd converted the third bedroom of her grandmother's house into a nursery, painting the walls with a mural that combined African patterns with contemporary design elements. Her mother, Regina, took leave from her nursing job to help during the final months, bringing her practical medical knowledge and endless supplies of love and support. Between Phoenix's traditional wisdom and Regina's modern medical training, Josephine felt wrapped in a cocoon of feminine strength and ancestral knowledge. The labor began on a warm June evening, just as the fireflies were beginning to dance in Phoenix's garden. 26 hours later, Zephyr came into the world crying with the force of a summer storm, followed 7 minutes later by his brother Zeus, who arrived quietly but with eyes wide open, taking in everything around him. "Look at them," Regina whispered, tears streaming down her face as she held Zeus while Phoenix cradled Zephyr. "Perfect in every way." And they were perfect. Their skin was the color of honey touched by sunlight, a beautiful blend of their parents' complexions. Their features were delicate but distinct, and even as newborns, there was something in the shape of their mouths, the set of their tiny chins, that spoke of Lyndon's determination. In the quiet hours of that first night, as her sons slept in their hospital bassinets, Josephine finally allowed herself to imagine a different future than the one she'd planned. These boys would be her masterpiece, more important than any building she could design. She would tell them stories about their father, his intelligence, his passion for sustainable development, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. They would know they came from love, even if it was love that bloomed and faded in a single night. The following weeks were a blur of midnight feedings, diaper changes, and moments of pure joy mixed with exhausting challenges. The twins had distinct personalities from the start. Zephyr was the vocal one, demanding attention with lusty cries, while Zeus observed the world with a quiet intensity that reminded Josephine so much of Lyndon, it made her heart ache. Phoenix insisted on performing traditional Ghanaian naming ceremonies for the boys, filling the house with the scent of special herbs and the sound of ancient prayers. "Names have power," she explained as she blessed each child. "Zephyr, like the wind, bringing change and movement. Zeus, like thunder, carrying strength and authority. They will move through this world with purpose." As summer turned to fall, Josephine established new routines. She set up a home office in the sunroom where she could work on her designs while watching the twins sleep in their matching bassinets. During their quiet moments, she would tell them stories about architecture, about their heritage, and about their father. "Your daddy builds towers that touch the clouds," she would whisper as she nursed them in the pre-dawn hours. "He dreams of cities that work in harmony with nature, just like Mommy does. And one day, when you're old enough to understand, I'll tell you about the night we danced in a rooftop garden above New York City, where the stars seemed close enough to touch, and anything felt possible." Regina and Phoenix took turns caring for the babies when Josephine needed to attend important meetings, creating a circle of love and protection around the newest members of their family. They taught the twins about their African heritage through songs and stories, ensuring they would grow up knowing both sides of their identity. As the months passed, the boys grew stronger, their personalities becoming more distinct. Zephyr was first to roll over, while Zeus was first to smile. They seemed to communicate in their own secret language, comforting each other in ways that amazed everyone who saw them. When one cried, the other would reach out instinctively, and peace would be restored. On quiet evenings, Josephine would sit in the nursery's rocking chair, a baby in each arm, and watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of purple and gold. In these moments, She felt both the weight and the blessing of her choices. The career she'd protected was still thriving. She'd won another major contract, this time for a sustainable community center in Chicago's South Side. But her greatest achievement lay sleeping in her arms, their tiny hands clutching her fingers, their peaceful breaths synchronizing in the gathering dusk. "Your father would be so proud of you," she would whisper, pressing gentle kisses to their foreheads. "And maybe someday, when the world is ready, when we're all ready, he'll know just how blessed we all are." As fall turned to winter again, and the twins grew from newborns to infants, Josephine began to see more and more of Lyndon in their features. It was in the way Zeus would furrow his brow when concentrating, in Zephyr's determined expression when learning something new. Each milestone was a celebration and a reminder of the secret she carried, not as a burden, but as a treasure waiting for its moment to be revealed. In her heart, she knew that someday their paths would cross again. Chicago and New York weren't so far apart in the world of elite architecture, and Lyndon's company was expanding its sustainable development projects nationwide. But for now, she had her boys, her work, and the unwavering support of her mother and grandmother. It was enough. It had to be enough. Yet sometimes, in the deepest part of night, when the twins were finally sleeping and the house was quiet, Josephine would find herself at her drafting table, designing a home that existed only in her dreams, a home with space for four, with a rooftop garden where two little boys could play while their parents watched the sunset together. She would add details, erase them, add them again, knowing that like all the best designs, life had a way of evolving beyond the original blueprint. Chapter 4. Stories of their father. "Tell us about Dad again," 5-year-old Zephyr asked, his voice eager as he climbed onto Josephine's lap in their cozy Chicago apartment. Zeus followed quietly, settling beside them on the oversized reading chair that had become their special storytelling spot. The evening light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. Outside, the Chicago skyline glittered like a string of jewels against the darkening sky. Josephine pulled both boys close, breathing in their familiar scent of bubble bath and childhood. At 5, they were already showing such distinct personalities, yet their bond remained unshakable. Zephyr always in motion, with his mother's creative spirit and his father's drive. Zeus, thoughtful and observant, who could sit for hours with his building blocks, creating structures that showed an innate understanding of balance and form. "Your father," Josephine began, her voice soft with memory, "is a man who builds dreams into reality. Just like the towers he creates, he stands tall and strong." She glanced at the architectural magazine on the coffee table, its cover featuring Lyndon Fern's latest sustainable development project. She'd been collecting these magazines, saving them for when the boys were older, a paper trail of their father's achievements. "Does he build towers as tall as yours, Mama?" Zeus asked, his small fingers tracing the pattern on her silk blouse. He had Lyndon's way of focusing entirely on whatever caught his interest, those striking blue eyes, so like his father's, fixed intently on her face. "His towers reach for the stars, my love," Josephine answered, remembering the Genesis Tower where their story began. "He believes in building things that make the world better, just like Mama does. Remember the green building we saw downtown yesterday? The one with the garden on every floor? That's the kind of vision your father has, making cities more beautiful, more in harmony with nature." Zephyr bounced excitedly, his energy impossible to contain. "Tell us about his eyes again. Zeus has his eyes, right? That's what Grandma Phoenix always says." Josephine smiled, running her fingers through Zephyr's curls. Though both boys had her rich brown skin tone, Zeus had inherited Lyndon's striking blue eyes, while Zephyr's were a warm brown like her own. "Yes, baby. Your father's eyes are like deep ocean pools, full of wisdom and kindness. When he looks at something, it's like he can see straight to its heart, understanding how all the pieces fit together. The boys had just started kindergarten at the prestigious Chicago Laboratory School, where their intelligence and creativity were already drawing attention. Their teacher had called Josephine in for a conference just last week, amazed by their advanced understanding of spatial relationships and mathematics. "They have an architect's mind," the teacher had said, not knowing how true those words were. "Tell us about the garden in the sky," Zeus requested softly. It was their favorite part of the story, and Josephine never tired of telling it. Each time she shared these memories, it felt like keeping a precious flame alive. "It was a magical place," she began, her voice taking on the dreamy quality that always appeared when she spoke of that night. "A garden floating above New York City, filled with plants from around the world. The stars seemed close enough to touch, and the city lights below looked like fallen constellations. Your father understood the beauty of it immediately. He knew every plant's name, every pattern's meaning." She didn't tell them about the way Lyndon's hand had felt in hers, or how his laugh had made her heart skip beats. Those were memories she kept for herself, tucked away like pressed flowers between the pages of her heart. "Is that where you fell in love?" Zephyr asked, always the romantic of the two. At 5, he was already drawing hearts on all his artwork, declaring love for everything from his teacher to the pigeons in the park. Josephine's heart tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "Love comes in many forms, my darling. Your father and I shared a beautiful dream that night, and that dream gave me you too, my greatest masterpieces." Zeus, ever perceptive, reached up to touch her cheek. "Don't be sad, Mama. We'll meet him someday, right? When we're bigger." "Yes, my love," she promised, holding them closer. "When the time is right, you'll meet him, and he'll be so proud of you both, just as I am every single day." The apartment was filled with evidence of their father's indirect presence. The boys' room featured a wall-sized mural of New York's skyline, with the Genesis Tower prominently displayed. Their building blocks were architectural grade, specially ordered from the same company that made professional modeling supplies. Even their bedtime stories often centered around buildings and design, nurturing the inherited passion that seemed to flow in their veins. "Mama," Zeus said thoughtfully, playing with one of her bronze bangles, "does Dad build with blocks like we do?" Josephine smiled, remembering the models she'd seen in Lyndon's office that night. "He started just like you, with blocks and dreams. Now he builds communities, places where people can live and work and be happy. That's what makes him special. He doesn't just build buildings, he builds hope." "Like your community center," Zephyr exclaimed, referring to her latest project in Chicago's South Side. "The one with the basketball courts and the library and the garden for growing food." "Exactly like that," Josephine agreed, pride warming her voice. She'd won several awards for that project, which combined sustainable architecture with community needs. Sometimes she wondered if Lyndon had seen the press coverage, if he recognized her evolving style. The boys had started collecting architecture magazines on their own, creating scrapbooks of buildings they liked. Sometimes they'd excitedly show her a picture of one of Lyndon's projects, not knowing it was their father's work. Each time, Josephine's heart would swell with a mixture of pride and longing. "Time for bed, my brilliant builders," she announced, noting the darkening sky outside. But as always, there were negotiations. "One more story," Zephyr pleaded, while Zeus added his own quiet, "Please, Mama." Josephine pretended to consider, though she already knew she'd give in. These moments were precious, and she was acutely aware of how quickly they were growing up. Soon, stories might not be enough. Soon, they'd have more questions, harder ones to answer. "All right," she conceded. "One more. How about I tell you about the time your father convinced an entire board of directors to turn their office building's roof into a butterfly garden?" The boys settled in, their small bodies warm against hers as she began another story. She never lied to them about Lyndon. Every story was true, gathered from magazine articles, industry news, and that one magical night when she'd learned so much about his dreams and values. "Your father believes that nature belongs everywhere, even in the heart of the city," she began, watching their eyes grow heavy even as they fought to stay awake. "He once said that every building should give something back to the earth." As she spoke, her fingers absently traced the lines of the pendant she always wore, a small silver compass that Phoenix had given her when the boys were born. "To help you find your way when the time comes," her grandmother had said. Josephine hadn't known then how much she would need that reminder, how often she would question her decisions. The boys finally drifted off, their faces peaceful in sleep. Josephine carried them one at a time to their room, tucking them into beds surrounded by architectural drawings they'd made. Crayon sketches of impossible buildings with slides instead of stairs and trees growing from every window. Standing in their doorway, watching their gentle breathing, Josephine felt the familiar mix of emotions wash over her. Pride in these remarkable boys who carried the best of both their parents. Guilt over the secret she kept from Lyndon. Hope that when the truth finally came out, he would understand why she'd made the choices she had. Back in the living room, she pulled out her sketchbook, adding to the collection of drawings she'd been making since the boys were born. Every milestone, every story, every question about their father, all documented in architecture's language of lines and shadows. Someday, she would share these with Lyndon, help him understand the years he'd missed. Her phone buzzed with an email, another high-profile project, this one in New York. Her heart raced as she read the details. Working in New York would mean potentially crossing paths with Lyndon. The city wasn't so big in their professional circles, but as she looked at the twin beds reflected in the hallway mirror, she knew she couldn't hide forever. The boys were growing up so fast, their questions becoming more complex. They deserved to know their father, and Lyndon deserved to know them. "Soon," she whispered to the sleeping city outside her window, "when the time is right, we'll build a bridge across these years of silence. And maybe, just maybe, we'll find that love, like the best architecture, only grows stronger with a proper foundation." In their room, the boys slept peacefully, their dreams perhaps filled with towering buildings and gardens in the sky, unaware that their own story was about to enter a new chapter. On their bedside table, a magazine lay open to an article about Lyndon Fern's latest project, a sustainable housing development that looked remarkably like the structures Zeus had been building with his blocks all week. Chapter 5. Unexpected Reunion. The Chicago winter sun streamed through the windows of Josephine's corner office at Sterling & Associates, where she'd built a respected reputation over the past 6 years. Awards and accolades lined the walls, testament to her growing influence in sustainable architecture. But today, all her accomplishments seemed to fade into the background as she stared at the meeting agenda on her desk. Fern Industries Collaboration, Green Cities Initiative. Her heart thundered in her chest. 6 years, 6 years of carefully avoiding New York projects, of declining conferences where she knew he'd speak, of building a life that orbited around his absence. Now, fate had brought Lyndon Fern directly to her doorstep. The morning had started normally enough. She'd dropped the twins at their progressive elementary school, where they were already earning recognition for their extraordinary mathematical and artistic abilities. Zeus had been excited about his science project, a model of a self-sustaining building that looked remarkably like something his father might have designed. Zephyr had been chattering about the school's upcoming architecture club, which he'd helped organize despite being its youngest member. Now, standing in her office, Josephine smoothed her tailored burgundy suit, a power color, her grandmother Phoenix would say. Her natural hair was styled in an elegant updo, gold accessories adding subtle warmth to her professional appearance. At 33, she'd grown more, confident in her skin, in her position, in her choices. But seeing Lyndon again, that would test every ounce of that confidence. She heard him before she saw him, that rich, warm voice that had haunted her dreams for 6 years, carrying down the hallway as he spoke with her colleagues. Then the door opened, and time seemed to stop. Lyndon Fern stood in her doorway, more distinguished than she remembered. Silver threaded his temples now, and fine lines crinkled the corners of his eyes that were exact copies of their son Zeus's. He wore his success well, his bespoke charcoal suit and confident stance speaking of the empire he'd built. But there was something else too, a weight in his gaze that hadn't been there before. Josephine. He breathed her name like a prayer or a curse. She couldn't tell which. I had heard you were heading the Chicago Sustainability Division, but... Words failed him as his eyes swept the office, landing on her desk. There, in plain sight, sat a framed photo of the twins on their 6th birthday, bright smiles showcasing missing front teeth as they posed with their award-winning science fair project. A miniature, sustainable city that had earned them recognition in the local paper. The blood drained from Lyndon's face as he stared at the photograph. She saw the exact moment recognition hit him, the way his body tensed. His hands gripped the doorframe, his breathing stopped. The resemblance was undeniable. Zeus's blue eyes, his eyes, stared back from the photograph, while Zephyr's determined grin mirrored his own childhood photos. "They're mine," he stated. Not a question. Never a question. Lyndon had always seen straight to the heart of things. Josephine stood, her legs surprisingly steady, despite the earthquake happening in her heart. "Yes," she said simply. There was no point in denying it now. "Zephyr and Zeus, they're 6. 6 years," he echoed, his voice hollow. 6 years, Josephine. Were you ever going to tell me? Before she could answer, fate intervened in the form of her mother Phoenix, who had been scheduled to bring the boys to the office after their half-day at school. Their voices carried down the hallway, Zeus explaining something about sustainable energy to his grandmother, Zephyr's laughter bouncing off the walls. "Mom!" they shouted in unison as they burst into the office, then froze at the sight of the stranger, who wasn't really a stranger at all. Recognition dawned in Zeus's eyes first. He'd spent hours studying photos of sustainable architecture, including many featuring Lyndon Fern. "You're—" he started, his blue eyes, Lyndon's eyes, growing wide. "Dad," Zephyr finished, his voice barely a whisper. The world held its breath as father and sons stared at each other, 6 years of absence crystallizing into a single moment of profound recognition. Phoenix stood in the doorway, her wise eyes taking in the scene with a mix of relief and concern. Time seemed to stretch like taffy as the twins moved closer to Lyndon, drawn by some invisible force of blood and bone and shared DNA. Zeus reached out first, touching Lyndon's hand with the same careful consideration he gave to examining building materials. Zephyr, never one to hold back, simply wrapped his arms around Lyndon's waist. "We knew we'd meet you someday," Zephyr declared with the simple faith of childhood. "Mom always said when the time was right." Lyndon's arms came around both boys automatically, his eyes meeting Josephine's over their heads. In that look, she saw everything: anger, hurt, wonder, and something else. Something that made her heart skip, just as it had that night in the rooftop garden 6 years ago. "Your buildings are amazing," Zeus said earnestly, looking up at his father. "We have all the magazines. And we build too. Want to see our designs?" A choked laugh escaped Lyndon as he knelt down to their level, drinking in every detail of their faces. "I'd love to see your designs," he managed, his voice rough with emotion. "I'd love to see everything." Phoenix chose that moment to step forward. "Perhaps we should all sit down," she suggested, her calm voice anchoring the chaos of the moment. "It seems there's much to discuss." Josephine watched as her carefully constructed world shifted on its axis. The twins had already pulled Lyndon to their special corner of her office where they kept their drafting table, eagerly showing him their latest architectural creations. His genuine interest in their work, the way he asked them thoughtful questions about their designs, the proud smile as they explained their innovative ideas. It was everything she'd imagined and feared. The photo on her desk caught her eye, the twins beaming at the camera, their whole lives ahead of them. A new photo would need to be taken now, she realized, one that included the missing piece of their family puzzle, the father whose absence had shaped their lives in ways both subtle and profound. As she watched Lyndon with their sons, Josephine felt hope tentatively bloom in her chest. Perhaps this unexpected reunion, though years late and heavy with unspoken words, could be the foundation for something new, something stronger. After all, the best buildings were often those that rose from the ruins of what came before. The Chicago skyline stretched beyond her office windows, a testament to human perseverance and vision. Somewhere out there, their future waited to be designed, one careful choice at a time. Like any good architect, Josephine knew that the most important part of any structure was its foundation. And maybe, just maybe, they had finally found theirs. Chapter 6. Truth unleashed. Lyndon spotted the photo during their project discussion. Two boys, about 6 years old, with his eyes staring back at him. The world tilted on its axis as realization dawned. "They're mine, aren't they?" His voice cracked with emotion. Before Josephine could respond, fate intervened. The office door burst open as Phoenix brought the twins in early from school. "Mom!" they shouted, then froze at the sight of the stranger whose face mirrored their own. Chapter 7. Storms and Shelter. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Lyndon's temporary office at the Chicago branch of Fern Industries. The city sprawled below, a maze of architecture and ambition, but his attention was fixed on the stack of photo albums spread across his desk. Josephine had delivered them this morning, 6 years of their sons' lives carefully documented and preserved. Birth certificates, first steps, first words, report cards, art projects. Every achievement, every milestone he'd missed, meticulously catalogued with the same attention to detail she brought to her architectural projects. His fingers trembled as he touched a photo of the twins on their first day of preschool, their matching bow ties and serious expressions making his heart ache. A knock at the door interrupted his reverie. His sister, Sage Fern, entered with her characteristic purposeful stride, her designer suit as impeccable as her legal reputation. "The custody papers are ready," she announced, placing a thick folder on his desk. "We can file them today." Lyndon leaned back in his chair, studying his sister's determined expression. "I'm not filing for custody, Sage." "Lyndon," she began, her voice taking on the tone she used in court, "she kept your children from you for 6 years. 6 years. As your lawyer and your sister, I strongly advise—" "As my sister," he interrupted gently, "look at this." He handed her a photograph from the album. It showed the twins at their kindergarten science fair, beaming proudly beside their project, a miniature sustainable city that could have been pulled straight from one of his own early sketches. "They're brilliant, Sage, happy, well-adjusted. Josephine has done an amazing job raising them." "That doesn't excuse—" "No, it doesn't excuse it," he agreed, running a hand through his silver-streaked hair. "But I understand it. You didn't see how the industry treated her back then. A black woman in architecture, finally breaking through. One hint of scandal would have destroyed everything she'd worked for." Sage's expression softened as she sank into one of the office's leather chairs. "You're still defending her. After all this time. After what she did." "I'm choosing to focus on what we can build now," Lyndon replied, his eyes drawn to a recent photo of the twins in their school uniforms. "They need stability, not a legal battle. They need both their parents working together." His phone buzzed. A text from Zeus showing his latest architectural sketch, followed quickly by a video from Zephyr demonstrating a new sustainable energy concept he'd developed with his brother. In just 2 weeks, they'd mastered the art of coexisting in 2 households, spending their days after school alternating between Josephine's brownstone and Lyndon's temporary Chicago residence. "The board won't like you extending your stay in Chicago indefinitely," Sage warned, but her tone had lost its edge. She'd grown fond of her nephews, even in such a short time. "The board will adapt," Lyndon stated firmly. "I'm not missing any more of their lives. We're opening a major branch here anyway. It makes sense for me to oversee it personally." His computer chimed with an incoming video call. Zeus and Zephyr's faces filled the screen, their excitement palpable even through the digital connection. "Dad," Zephyr burst out, barely containing himself, "we got it. We got accepted into the Young Architects summer program." "Both of us," Zeus added more quietly, but his blue eyes, so like Lyndon's own, sparkled with pride. "That's incredible," Lyndon beamed, his heart swelling. "I know how hard you worked on those applications. Have you told your mother?" "She's right here," Zephyr replied, and the camera shifted to show Josephine in her office, her smile radiant with maternal pride. "They want to celebrate with both of us," she said softly. "Maybe dinner?" The boys are eager to share their program ideas. Lyndon felt the familiar flutter in his chest that her voice still triggered, even after all these years. "I'll make reservations at Alinea," he offered. "An achievement like this deserves something special." Sage watched the exchange with knowing eyes, gathering her legal documents without comment. The custody papers disappeared into her briefcase, unmentioned and unnecessary. That evening, the prestigious restaurant's private dining room hummed with the energy of family celebration. The twins commanded the conversation, their enthusiasm for architecture matching their father's own passion. Zeus methodically explained his theories about incorporating traditional African design elements into modern sustainable structures, a beautiful blend of both his parents' influences. Zephyr bounced between topics, his creative energy infectious as he described his vision for buildings that could adapt to climate change. Josephine sat across from Lyndon, her dark skin glowing in the warm lighting, her natural hair styled elegantly. She'd lost none of her beauty in the intervening years. If anything, motherhood had added a depth to her grace that made her even more stunning. Their eyes met over the boys' animated discussion, sharing silent moments of parental pride. "Remember what you said that night in the rooftop garden?" she asked softly during a lull in the conversation. "About buildings needing to tell stories?" Lyndon nodded, surprised she remembered such a small detail from their one night together. Every structure should speak to the soul, not just shelter the body. "They do that naturally," she gestured to their sons, who were now engaged in an intense debate about vertical gardening techniques. "Tell stories through their designs. It's like they inherited both our voices." The evening flowed seamlessly, their small family unit feeling more natural with each passing day. The initial anger and hurt of their reunion had mellowed into something more complex, a shared understanding that the past couldn't be changed, but the future was theirs to design. Later that night, after the twins had been dropped off at Josephine's brownstone, Lyndon stood in his temporary Chicago apartment, looking out at the city lights. His phone buzzed with a message from Josephine, a photo of the boys sleeping, their desks still covered with architectural drawings they'd wanted to show him tomorrow. Another message followed. They asked if you could help them build a model of their summer program project. Zeus has some structural questions he says only you can answer. Lyndon's throat tightened with emotion as he typed his reply, "I'll be there." For everything from now on. In his home office, the photo albums Josephine had given him lay open, telling the story of 6 years he could never get back. But beside them sat new photos, Selfies with the twins at architecture exhibits, family dinners, impromptu design sessions where all four of them lost track of time discussing sustainable innovations. His sister's legal papers remained unfiled, gathering dust in her briefcase. Instead, Lyndon and Josephine had drawn up their own agreement, not a custody arrangement, but a commitment to co-parent harmoniously, to put their son's needs first, to build something new from the foundation of their past. The Chicago wind whistled outside his windows as Lyndon settled at his desk, pulling out his own design notebook. In it, he'd begun sketching ideas for a new kind of family home, one that would honor both his and Josephine's architectural styles, provide spaces for the twins to create and grow, and maybe, just maybe, leave room for dreams he hadn't dared to voice yet. Because some storms, he was learning, didn't destroy foundations. They revealed how strong they truly were. And in the shelter of their son's love, he and Josephine were discovering that the most beautiful structures often rose from the places where lightning struck. Chapter 8. Building Bridges. Spring bloomed across Chicago, painting the city in soft greens and cherry blossoms. In Lyndon's newly purchased penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, the weekend routine had become sacred. The massive living room had been transformed into an architect's playground, professional drafting tables sized for children set up beside his own workspace, state-of-the-art modeling software running on sleek computers, and enough building materials to construct a small city. This Saturday morning, sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows as Zeus methodically assembled a complex structural model, his small hands moving with precise confidence he'd inherited from his father. Beside him, Zephyr bounced between three different projects, his creative energy matching his mother's innovative spirit. Lyndon sat between them, alternating his attention between his son's projects, his heart still amazed at how naturally they'd fallen into this rhythm. "Dad," Zeus called softly, his blue eyes, mirror images of Lyndon's own, focused intently on his model. "Can you help me calculate the load-bearing capacity for this central column? I think if we adjust the angle here." His fingers traced the delicate structure with an understanding that belied his 6 years. "Of course." Lyndon moved closer, noting how Zeus had already incorporated several advanced engineering principles he'd somehow intuited. "You know, this reminds me of a challenge I faced with the Singapore Sky Gardens project." Zephyr's head snapped up at that, his current project temporarily forgotten. "The one with the hanging gardens that change levels? Mom has all the magazines about that one. She used it as inspiration for her community center design." Lyndon's heart warmed at this casual mention of Josephine's work. Over the past months, they'd developed a comfortable co-parenting relationship, sharing not just time with the boys, but professional insights and industry news. The twins had become a bridge between them, their shared love of architecture creating a foundation for healing old wounds. "Here," Lyndon pulled up the original Singapore plans on his tablet, watching as both boys crowded close. "See how we solved the weight distribution issue? Sometimes the most elegant solution is also the simplest." Zeus nodded seriously, immediately applying the principle to his model. Zephyr, however, was already racing ahead to new possibilities. "But what if you made the gardens movable? Like, they could shift position based on the sun's location or the season?" "That's actually brilliant," Lyndon praised, making a note in his project file. "Would you like to help me develop that idea for our new Chicago project?" The boys' faces lit up. Working with their father on real architectural projects had become their greatest joy. Every weekend brought new lessons, not just in architecture and engineering, but in the subtle art of family bonding. Lyndon had discovered that each boy required a different approach. Zeus thrived on technical challenges and precise calculations, while Zephyr needed room to let his creativity soar. The elevator chimed, announcing Josephine's arrival for their weekly family lunch. She stepped into the penthouse, elegant in casual weekend wear, carrying a portfolio of her latest designs. These working lunches had become another tradition, a way for all of them to share their professional passions while nurturing their personal connections. "Mom!" Zephyr rushed to show her his latest innovation. "Look what Dad taught us about cantilevers. I think we can adapt it for your affordable housing project." Josephine's eyes met Lyndon's over their son's excited explanation, sharing a moment of pure parental pride. She moved through the space with familiar ease, stopping to examine Zeus's model with professional interest. "The structural integration is remarkable," she noted, and Zeus beamed at her recognition. "You've combined both our design philosophies beautifully." "That's what we were aiming for," Zeus replied softly. "Dad says the best architecture speaks with multiple voices while maintaining harmony." Lyndon watched as Josephine settled at the drafting table with their sons, her natural teaching style complementing his own approach. They'd found a rhythm in these moments, their professional expertise merging seamlessly with their parental roles. The afternoon unfolded like a well-designed space, each element flowing naturally into the next. They ordered from the boys' favorite Thai restaurant, spreading architectural drawings and family conversation across the massive dining table. Zeus explained his latest theories about sustainable materials, while Zephyr demonstrated a new computer modeling technique he'd discovered. "We have something to show you both," Zephyr announced as they finished lunch, practically vibrating with excitement. Zeus nodded, more contained but equally eager. The twins disappeared into their project room, a space Lyndon had dedicated solely to their work, and returned with a large, covered model. With theatrical flourish, Zephyr pulled away the cloth to reveal an intricately detailed architectural model. "It's a family center," Zeus explained, pointing out the various elements. "See, this wing has Dad's sustainable energy systems. And this section uses Mum's community integration principles," Zephyr continued. "The central courtyard combines both your styles." Lyndon and Josephine leaned in to examine the model, both recognizing elements of their own design philosophies seamlessly blended with innovative new ideas. The boys had created something that spoke of both their parents while establishing their own unique architectural voice. "The gardens are designed for gatherings," Zeus pointed out, "because Mum always says architecture should bring people together. And the solar panels are integrated into the aesthetic elements," Zephyr added, "because Dad teaches us that sustainability should be beautiful, not just functional." Josephine's hand brushed against Lyndon's as they both reached to examine a particularly clever detail. The brief contact sent familiar warmth through his arm, reminding him of rooftop gardens and starlit conversations 6 years ago. "We thought," Zeus said hesitantly, his confidence wavering for the first time, "maybe this could be a real project, something we could all work on together." The hope in their sons' voices touched something deep in both parents' hearts. This wasn't just a model. It was a blueprint for healing, for family, for future possibilities. "I think," Lyndon said carefully, looking at Josephine for agreement, "this deserves serious consideration. Perhaps we could develop it as a joint venture between our firms." Josephine nodded, her professional eye already noting potential refinements, while her mother's heart swelled with pride. "A true family project," she agreed. "Something to show the world what we can build together." The afternoon light painted golden highlights across the model as the family gathered around it, 4 minds already spinning with possibilities. Lyndon had moved his empire's center to Chicago, establishing a new headquarters that allowed him to be present for every moment of his sons' lives. Josephine's firm had welcomed the collaboration with Fern Industries, their combined expertise creating innovative new approaches to sustainable urban development. But more importantly, They'd built something far more precious than any architectural marvel. A family foundation strong enough to support all their dreams. As the day wound down and the boys became absorbed in refining their model, Lyndon found himself standing beside Josephine at the windows, watching the sun set over Lake Michigan. "They amaze me every day," he said softly. "Their creativity, their intelligence, the way they see the world." "They have the best of both of us," Josephine replied, her voice warm with pride. "And now they have both of us to guide them." The city lights began to twinkle on as dusk descended, and behind them, their sons continued to build their vision of the future, one careful piece at a time, just as their parents had taught them. In the gathering darkness, the model of their family center seemed to glow with possibility, a beacon lighting the way forward for all of them. Chapter 9. Family Foundations. The Chicago autumn painted the city in rich golds and deep reds as Josephine stood in her office at Sterling & Associates, reviewing the final renderings for the Family Center project. What had begun as the twins' ambitious model had evolved into a groundbreaking collaboration between her firm and Fern Industries. More importantly, it had become the catalyst for something she hadn't dared to hope for, a second chance at love. The past months had transformed their careful co-parenting arrangement into something deeper. It started with lingering conversations after the twins' weekend transitions, expanded into working dinners discussing the family center project, and slowly blossomed into moments that had nothing to do with children or architecture at all. A knock at her door interrupted her reverie. Lyndon stood there, impeccable in a charcoal suit that emphasized his distinguished silver temples. Even after all these years, the sight of him made her heart skip a beat. "The contractors need final approval on the courtyard specifications," he said, crossing to her desk with a tablet. But instead of showing her the plans, he placed a cup of her favorite Ethiopian blend coffee beside her drawings. "I thought you might need this. You've been here since dawn." The thoughtful gesture touched her deeply. He'd been doing this more often lately, remembering her preferences, anticipating her needs, finding small ways to show he cared. Just yesterday, he'd had lunch delivered to her office when she was too busy with client meetings to break for food. "The twins want to show us their latest refinements to the rooftop garden design," she said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "They've been working on it all week at school. Their teacher says they're drawing plans during math class." Lyndon chuckled, leaning against her desk in a way that felt comfortably intimate. "Zeus told me they've incorporated some traditional African architectural elements. He said you've been teaching them about your grandmother's heritage." "Phoenix has been telling them stories about Ghanaian building techniques," Josephine nodded, warmth spreading through her chest at how naturally their family dynamics had evolved. "They're fascinated by the way traditional methods can be adapted for modern sustainability." "They have your vision," Lyndon said softly, his blue eyes holding hers. "Your ability to see beyond the obvious, to find beauty in unexpected places." The air between them hummed with unspoken possibilities. These moments had been happening more frequently, quiet acknowledgements of the connection that had never truly faded, despite 6 years apart. "Lyndon," she began, but was interrupted by her phone buzzing with a text from Zephyr. Their son had sent a photo of himself and Zeus in their school uniforms, proudly holding up their latest architectural drawings. "We need to frame that," Lyndon said, moving closer to see the phone screen. His presence beside her was both comforting and electrifying. "Add it to the project documentation. They're as much a part of this as we are." Speaking of documentation, Josephine pulled out a thick portfolio from her drawer. "I found these last night, all their early drawings from when they were just starting to show interest in architecture. I thought maybe you'd like to see them." Lyndon's expression softened as he took the portfolio, his fingers brushing hers in a touch that sent sparks through her arm. "I'd love to, perhaps over dinner. The boys are at Phoenix's for their weekly sleepover." The invitation hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. They'd been careful to keep their relationship professional, focused on co-parenting and their collaboration on the family center. But lately, the boundaries had begun to blur. "There's that new sustainable restaurant in River North," Josephine suggested, her heart racing. "The one with the rooftop garden." "Like old times," Lyndon smiled, remembering their first meeting in the Genesis Tower's rooftop garden, though hopefully with a better ending this time. Later that evening, as the sun set over Chicago's skyline, they sat in the restaurant's beautifully designed rooftop space. The portfolio lay forgotten on the table between them as conversation flowed effortlessly from the boys' latest achievements to their shared vision for the family center, and finally, to more personal matters. "I've been thinking about that night," Lyndon said softly, swirling the wine in his glass. "Not just about what went wrong, but about what went right. How instantly we connected, how perfectly we understood each other's passion for sustainable design." Josephine's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her water. "I thought about it every day for 6 years, especially when the boys would get excited about architecture. They have your enthusiasm, your drive to make the world better through design. You gave them so much more." Lyndon reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "You gave them strength, creativity, cultural pride. You taught them to dream big while keeping their feet firmly planted in reality." "But they needed you too," Josephine admitted. "These past months, watching you with them, I see how much they've blossomed having both of us in their lives." The city lights twinkled below them, reminiscent of that first night in New York. But this time, their connection was deeper, enriched by shared experiences and the profound love for their children. "Do you remember what you said that night?" Lyndon asked, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. "About how the best designs come from taking risks?" Josephine nodded, her breath catching at the intensity in his eyes. "I think it's time we took another risk," he continued. "Not just for the boys, but for us. These past months, working together, watching you with our sons. I've fallen in love with you all over again. Or maybe I never stopped." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with promise and possibility. Josephine felt tears prick at her eyes as she thought of all the years lost, all the moments Lyndon had missed, and yet, "The boys asked me yesterday if you were going to be at their school's family day," she said softly. "Not just as their father, but as more. They see it too, Lyndon. How right this feels." He stood, pulling her to her feet and leading her to the garden's edge. The Chicago skyline spread before them, including both their architectural contributions to the city. In the distance, the family center was under construction, a physical manifestation of their collaboration. "You left before sunrise last time," he murmured, drawing her close. "This time, I'm asking you to stay, not just for tonight, but for all the mornings to come." The kiss, when it came, felt like coming home. It held the passion of their first night together, but also the depth of shared experiences, the joy of raising their sons, the understanding that came from years of growing separately and finally finding their way back together. When they finally parted, Josephine rested her head against his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat. "The boys will be ecstatic," she laughed softly. "They've been playing matchmaker for months," Lyndon admitted, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Zeus actually gave me a PowerPoint presentation on why we should optimize our family structure through permanent integration." "That sounds like our son," Josephine smiled, lifting her face for another kiss, always thinking in architectural terms. Above them, the stars twinkled just as they had that first night in New York. But now their story had a stronger foundation, built on years of separate growth, the miracle of their sons, and the careful reconstruction of trust and love. Stay, Lyndon whispered again. And this time, Josephine knew she would never leave. They had finally designed something perfect together, not just beautiful buildings or brilliant children, but a future that held space for all their dreams. As they drove home later, their fingers intertwined, Josephine thought about how architecture and love weren't so different after all. Both required solid foundations, careful planning, and the courage to reach for the sky. She and Lyndon had built something extraordinary together, and this time she knew it would last. Chapter 10. Past Meets Present. The elegant dining room of the exclusive Chicago club fell silent as Cordelia Fern made her entrance, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her Chanel suit a armor of old money and privilege. She'd flown in from New York unannounced, summoned by whispers of her son's rekindled relationship with Josephine Carter. Lyndon rose to greet his mother, his jaw set in a way that spoke of anticipated conflict. The twins, dressed in their best blazers for their first meeting with their paternal grandmother, watched with matching expressions of curiosity and caution. "Mother," Lyndon's voice carried across the hushed space, "I'd like you to meet your grandsons." Cordelia's practiced society smile faltered as she took in Zeus's startling blue eyes, so like her son's, so like her late husband's, and Zephyr's determined chin that mirrored the Fern family line. The proof of their lineage was undeniable, written in every feature of their beautiful brown faces. "So," she said, her voice carrying years of Boston Brahmin breeding, "these are the children, the ones we knew nothing about for 6 years." "Zeus and Zephyr," Josephine spoke up, her voice steady despite the tension crackling in the air. She'd faced down boardrooms full of skeptical investors. She wouldn't be cowed by one prejudiced socialite. "Your grandsons are gifted architects already. They've been featured in several youth innovation magazines." Cordelia's eyebrow arched as she took her seat, barely acknowledging the boys' polite greetings. "Yes, I've heard about their precociousness. Tell me, Miss Carter, was this your plan all along, to ensure your children had a claim to the Fern fortune?" "Mother," Lyndon's voice carried a warning edge, "the boys are right here." But Zeus and Zephyr were already exchanging glances, their unique twin connection allowing them to communicate volumes in a single look. At 6 years old, they were far more perceptive than anyone gave them credit for. "Actually, grandmother," Zeus spoke up, his quiet voice carrying the same authority his father used in board meetings, "we've already started our own architectural firm, Junior Innovations. We won a grant from the Young Entrepreneurs Foundation last month." Zephyr nodded enthusiastically. "We're designing sustainable housing solutions. Mom taught us about community integration, and Dad helps us with the technical specifications. Want to see our portfolio?" Before Cordelia could respond, a waiter arrived with an iPad. Clearly, they'd been anticipating this moment. The twins launched into a practice presentation, showing their grandmother project after project that demonstrated their inherited talent from both parents. "This is our biggest project," Zeus explained, pulling up renders of the family center. "It's being built right now. Mom and Dad's companies are collaborating on it, but it was our original design. We combined Dad's sustainable energy systems with Mom's community-centric spaces," Zephyr added proudly. "The whole building tells a story about bringing people together." Cordelia's facade cracked slightly as she watched her grandsons navigate complex architectural concepts with ease. They moved with the confidence of children who knew they were loved, who had been raised to be proud of both their heritage and their abilities. "The press has already caught wind of the story," she said finally, turning to Lyndon. "Your relationship with Ms. Carter, the secret children. There are rumors about rushed marriages to legitimize heirs." "Those rumors," came a new voice from the doorway, "are about to become a major problem." Sage Fern strode into the room, her designer suit a sharp contrast to her troubled expression. She placed a tablet in front of Lyndon, displaying a gossip website with the headline, "Fern Industries heirs secret family, scandal or strategy." "They're painting it as a calculated move," Sage explained, her lawyer's mind already strategizing, suggesting Josephine orchestrated everything, from the one-night stand to the timing of the reunion, to position herself and the boys for a takeover of Fern Industries. Josephine felt her blood run cold. This was exactly what she'd feared 6 years ago. Her professional reputation being torn apart by prejudice and assumptions. But before she could speak, Lyndon stood up, his expression thunderous. "Enough!" he declared, moving to stand behind Josephine's chair, his hands resting protectively on her shoulders. "I won't have the mother of my children, the woman I love, slandered by gossip rags or anyone else." "Lyndon," Cordelia's voice held a note of desperation, "think about the company's reputation. The board members are already nervous about this situation." "The situation," Lyndon replied coldly, "is that I have 2 brilliant sons who have inherited the best of both their parents' talents. A successful partnership with one of the most innovative architects in sustainable design, and a chance to right the wrong I did 6 years ago by letting societal pressure keep me from the woman I love." The twins had moved to flank their mother, their small hands finding hers under the table. Their support was silent but absolute. "I've already called an emergency board meeting," Sage announced, her expression softening as she watched her nephews protect their mother. "But Lyndon, they're going to want you to distance yourself from the situation, at least publicly. Then they can find themselves a new CEO," Lyndon stated firmly. "I built Fern Industries into what it is today by focusing on sustainable innovation and social responsibility. If the board can't see that my family embodies those very principles, perhaps it's time for a change in leadership." Cordelia blanched. "You can't be serious. The company has been in our family for generations." "And it will continue to be," Zeus spoke up, his young voice steady. "Zephyr and I have lots of ideas for the future. We're already learning about sustainable business practices in our economics club." "Mother," Lyndon said softly, "you have a choice to make. You can either accept my family, all of my family, or you can watch from a distance as your grandsons revolutionize the industry without you." The silence that followed was broken by the arrival of their first course. As the waiter served the soup, Cordelia watched her grandsons thank the server with impeccable manners. She noted how Zeus adjusted his napkin with the same precise movements as her late husband, how Zephyr's enthusiastic commentary about the restaurant's sustainable practices echoed Lyndon's childhood passion. "The family center," she said finally, her voice slightly less rigid. "Tell me more about your design concepts." The twins exchanged excited glances before launching into a detailed explanation of their project. As they spoke, their natural intelligence and charm began to chip away at their grandmother's prejudices. It was hard to maintain social biases in the face of such obvious talent and genuine warmth. Josephine felt Lyndon's hand squeeze her shoulder supportively. They'd known this confrontation was coming, had prepared for it as best they could. But watching their sons win over their grandmother with pure merit and personality, that was a victory they hadn't dared to hope for. Later that evening, as the family gathered in Lyndon's penthouse, Sage was already working on a media strategy to counter the negative press. But the real story was unfolding in the living room, where Cordelia Fern sat with her grandsons, examining their architectural models with growing interest. "Your sustainable energy solutions," she admitted reluctantly, "remind me of your grandfather's early work. He was always ahead of his time too." "Mum has all grandfather's old technical journals," Zeus informed her. She used them to teach us about the history of sustainable architecture. Cordelia's eyes widened slightly as she turned to Josephine. You studied Richard's work. Of course, Josephine replied softly. His innovations in sustainable design were groundbreaking. I wanted the boys to understand their legacy, all of it. Something shifted in Cordelia's expression then, a crack in the facade of prejudice that had driven her actions. She looked at her grandsons with new eyes, seeing not threats to her family's legacy, but its living continuation. Perhaps, she said carefully, we could review some of Richard's old designs together. He had several projects that were never developed, projects that might benefit from a fresh perspective. The twins' faces lit up at this olive branch, and Lyndon pulled Josephine closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. They had weathered the storm together, their family bonds proving stronger than social prejudice or corporate politics. Outside, the Chicago night sparkled with possibility, and in the warmth of their home, bridges were being built across generations. The past was meeting the present, and together they would design a future that had room for all of them. Chapter 11. Love's Symphony. The family center gleamed in the late afternoon sun, its innovative design a testament to the love story that had built it. The grand opening was scheduled for tomorrow, but tonight belonged to family. Lyndon had arranged for a private tour, telling the twins it was a final inspection, but his hand kept touching the velvet box in his pocket, a reminder of his true plans. Josephine walked through the main atrium, her heels clicking on the sustainably sourced bamboo flooring. She was stunning in a deep purple dress that highlighted her curves, her natural hair styled in an elegant updo adorned with golden pins that caught the light from the solar-powered chandeliers above. The boys bounded ahead, eager to show their grandmother Phoenix every detail of their design come to life. The vertical gardens are already thriving, Zeus explained proudly, pointing to the living walls that brought nature indoors. The plants were arranged in patterns that told stories of both African and European architectural heritage, a beautiful blend of their family's diverse background. And look at the solar collection system, Zephyr added excitedly, dragging Phoenix to another feature. We designed it to look like traditional Adinkra symbols when viewed from above. Phoenix nodded approvingly, her wise eyes taking in not just the building's features, but the way her family had grown together through its creation. Even Cordelia Fern, who had joined them for this private viewing, seemed genuinely impressed by her grandson's innovation. The integration of cultural elements with sustainable technology is remarkable, Cordelia admitted, watching as Zeus demonstrated how the building's automated systems responded to natural light patterns. Lyndon moved to stand beside Josephine as they watched their sons play tour guide. They're natural teachers, he observed softly, like their mother. Josephine smiled, leaning slightly into his warmth. With their father's gift for winning over skeptics, I never thought I'd see your mother nodding along to a lecture on African architectural influences. You changed all of us, Lyndon replied, his voice thick with emotion. You and the boys. You taught us that the strongest structures are built from diversity, not division. The tour continued up to the second floor, where community spaces flowed seamlessly into educational areas. The twins had insisted on including a youth architecture program, wanting to inspire other children to dream in steel and glass and sustainable innovation. This is where we'll teach our first class, Zephyr announced, spinning in excitement as they entered a bright studio space. Mom and Dad are going to help us run workshops for kids from the neighborhood. The future of architecture, Phoenix mused, watching her great-grandsons with pride, taught by its future masters. As the tour progressed, Lyndon grew increasingly nervous, though he hid it well. Everything had been meticulously planned with the twins' help. They reached the rooftop garden just as the sun began to set, painting the Chicago skyline in shades of gold and purple. The garden was a masterpiece of sustainable design, with winding paths leading through native plants and quiet seating areas. But the centerpiece was a scale model of the Genesis Tower, where their story had begun, crafted from recycled materials and surrounded by miniature versions of every major project they'd worked on separately and together. "What's this?" Josephine asked, moving closer to examine the detailed models. "I don't remember this being in the plans." "We added it," Zeus said softly, exchanging knowing looks with his brother. "It's our family's architectural journey." "Every building tells a story," Zephyr added, his young voice serious. "And these tell ours." Josephine walked slowly around the display, touching each model gently. There was the Genesis Tower, where she and Lyndon had first met, her award-winning community centers, his groundbreaking sustainable developments, and finally the family center itself, their first true collaboration. "But there's an empty platform," she noted, pointing to a space in the center of the display. "That's for the next chapter," Lyndon said, moving to stand beside her. The setting sun cast long shadows across the garden as he took her hands in his. "The one we'll design together." Phoenix guided the twins to stand slightly back, though their excitement was barely contained. Even Cordelia seemed to be holding her breath. "Josephine Carter," Lyndon began, his voice carrying across the rooftop garden. "6 years ago, we danced under the stars and shared our dreams of building a better world. I lost you once, to fear and prejudice, but fate gave us a second chance through our amazing sons." He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands, as tears began to shine in Josephine's eyes. "You are the most brilliant architect I know, not just of buildings, but of family, of love, of all the things that truly matter. You built a foundation of love and strength for our boys when I couldn't be there. You taught them to be proud of all parts of their heritage. You showed me that the most beautiful designs come from bringing different elements into perfect harmony." The velvet box emerged from his pocket, opening to reveal a ring that combined African and European design elements in platinum and gold, with a center stone that caught the last rays of sunlight. "The twins helped design it," he added softly, seeing her recognition of the cultural elements in the ring's pattern. "They said it needed to tell our whole story. All the best buildings have a strong foundation," Zeus piped up from where he stood with his brother. "And the best foundations are built on love," Zephyr finished, practically bouncing with excitement. Josephine laughed through her tears, looking at her sons, their sons, who had helped orchestrate this moment. Even Cordelia was smiling now, having finally understood that love knows no boundaries of race or class. "Josephine," Lyndon continued, his voice thick with emotion, "will you marry me? Will you help me design not just buildings, but a future that's worthy of the family we've created?" The rooftop garden fell silent, except for the soft whisper of wind through the native plants. The Chicago skyline stretched out before them, a testament to human ability to reach for the stars while staying grounded in what matters most. "Yes," Josephine whispered, then louder, "Yes! 1,000 times yes!" The twins burst into cheers as Lyndon slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to pull her into a passionate kiss. Phoenix wiped away tears of joy, while Cordelia surprised everyone by embracing her grandsons. "We knew you'd say yes," Zephyr declared confidently as the family came together in a group hug. "We did all the calculations." "And the probability analysis," Zeus added seriously, making everyone laugh. As twilight settled over Chicago, the rooftop garden's sustainable lighting system activated, bathing them all in a warm glow. The Genesis Tower model caught the light, throwing shadows that danced across the garden like memories given form. "I have something to show you too," Josephine said softly, leading Lyndon to her office 1 floor below. On her desk sat architectural plans, their wedding venue, already designed with the same attention to detail and cultural integration that marked all their best work. "The boys helped me too," she admitted with a smile. "We've been working on it for months, hoping—" "It's perfect," Lyndon breathed, studying the plans that showed a space as unique and beautiful as their love story. "Just like everything you design." They rejoined their family in the rooftop garden, where Phoenix had produced champagne for the adults and sparkling cider for the twins. As they toasted to their future, the first stars began to appear above them, just like that night 6 years ago, but this time with no goodbye waiting in the wings. "To the next chapter," Lyndon proposed, raising his glass. "To family," Josephine added. "To architecture," the twins chimed in together, making everyone laugh again. The night wrapped around them like a warm embrace as they celebrated in their rooftop garden, surrounded by the physical manifestation of their love story. The family center below them and the stars above witnessed the moment. A family that had been built piece by piece finally became whole. Chapter 12. Full Circle. The Genesis Towers rooftop garden had been transformed into a wedding venue that told their entire love story through architecture and design. The space where Lyndon and Josephine had first connected 6 years ago now bloomed with a perfect fusion of African and European design elements, every detail carefully planned by the family together. Josephine stood in the preparation suite, her wedding dress a masterpiece that honored both her heritage and her modern sensibilities. The ivory silk was embellished with traditional Ghanaian patterns rendered in delicate beadwork, while the cut was elegantly contemporary. Her natural hair was crowned with a headpiece that Phoenix had worn at her own wedding, updated with modern elements by an African artisan. "Mom," Zeus called softly from the doorway, resplendent in his custom-tailored suit. "It's almost time." Beside him, Zephyr could barely contain his excitement, bouncing on his toes in an identical suit. At 7 years old, the twins had taken their roles as both ring-bearers and escorts for their mother with utmost seriousness. They had even contributed to the wedding design, insisting on architectural elements that symbolized the joining of their family. "My beautiful boys," Josephine's eyes welled with tears as she looked at her sons. They had grown so much in the past year, their bond with Lyndon deepening into something precious and unshakable. Phoenix entered, her traditional Ghanaian kente cloth radiating warmth and wisdom. "The garden is ready," she announced, her eyes shining with pride, "and you won't believe what your sons added as a surprise." Curiosity piqued, Josephine followed her grandmother's gaze through the floor-to-ceiling windows. There, amid the carefully planned floral arrangements and sustainable design elements, stood a new structure. The twins had worked with both sets of grandparents to create a wedding arch that incorporated architectural elements from every significant building in Josephine and Lyndon's careers, woven together into a stunning symbol of unity. "We designed it ourselves," Zephyr announced proudly. "Grandmother Cordelia helped us source the materials, and Grandma Phoenix advised on the cultural symbols." "Even the metal framework tells a story," Zeus added quietly. "Each joint represents a moment in your journey together." Josephine's heart swelled as she studied the arch. There were elements from the Genesis Tower, from her community centers, from Lyndon's sustainable developments, and from their family center, all flowing together in perfect harmony. Even more touching was the evidence of collaboration between Phoenix and Cordelia, two women who had started as adversaries but had been united by their grandson's love. "It's time," Phoenix said softly, adjusting Josephine's veil one last time. The delicate fabric was adorned with architectural sketches rendered in tiny crystals, drawings made by the twins of their family's most significant buildings. The rooftop garden had been arranged to tell their story chronologically. Guests would enter through a space designed to evoke the original Genesis Tower opening, complete with subtle lighting that mimicked that first fateful night. The aisle wound through various chapters of their journey, each section showcasing the architecture that had shaped their lives. As the string quartet began playing a composition that blended classical wedding music with traditional African rhythms, Josephine took her place between her sons. Zeus, ever serious, offered his arm with perfect gentlemanly grace, while Zephyr beamed with barely contained joy on her other side. The doors opened, and their journey began. Josephine's breath caught as she saw the full scope of the garden's transformation. The evening sun painted the sky in the same colors as that night 6 years ago, but now everything was different. Now, she was walking toward her future rather than running from it. Lyndon stood beneath the twins' arch, his eyes filled with tears as he watched his family approach. Sage stood beside him as his best woman, while Cordelia and Phoenix had places of honor on either side, symbolizing the union of their families. The gathered guests, leaders in architecture, sustainable development, and their combined communities, created an aisle of smiling faces. As they reached the midpoint of their walk, the twins orchestrated their first surprise. Hidden speakers began playing recordings of their voices from various ages, sharing their dreams about their parents' reunion. "I knew Dad would find us," Zephyr's 5-year-old voice rang out. "Mom always said we just had to wait for the right time." Zeus's quiet wisdom followed. Tears streamed freely down Josephine's cheeks as they approached the arch. The final recording was from just last week, both boys together saying, "Now we can build everything as a family." Lyndon stepped forward to meet them, kneeling first to embrace his sons before rising to take Josephine's hands in his. The twins moved to stand on either side of the arch, their presence completing the picture of family unity. The ceremony celebrated every aspect of their journey. They exchanged vows that spoke of building futures, of sustainable love, of foundations strengthened by challenges overcome. The rings they exchanged were custom designed by the twins, featuring architectural elements that represented their family's story. "Architecture is the art of creating spaces for life to flourish," Lyndon said in his vows, his voice carrying across the garden. "You taught me that the most important space we can create is the one in our hearts for love to grow." "Every great design begins with a dream," Josephine responded, squeezing his hands. "You and our sons taught me that the biggest dreams are the ones we dare to build together." As they sealed their vows with a kiss, the twins activated their final surprise. The arch above them began to glow softly, projecting a canopy of stars onto the gathering dusk, a recreation of the sky on the night they first met. The reception space was a marvel of sustainable design and personal touches. Each table featured miniature models of significant buildings from their lives, created by the twins with help from both sets of grandparents. The dance floor was inlaid with patterns that combined African and European architectural motifs, telling the story of their cultural unity. During the reception, Zeus and Zephyr proudly unveiled their wedding gift, detailed plans for a family home they had designed with input from both parents. The drawings showed a perfect blend of their mother's community-centered spaces and their father's sustainable innovations, with special areas dedicated to their shared love of architecture. "We included a design studio for all of us," Zeus explained, pointing out the features. "And a rooftop garden, of course," Zephyr added with a grin. "Every love story needs one of those." As the evening progressed, the family shared their first dance under the stars, real ones now, as the night had deepened to display the same constellations that had witnessed their first meeting. The twins insisted on cutting in, leading to a joyful family dance that had all the guests smiling. Cordelia approached Phoenix during a quiet moment, both grandmothers watching their shared family with pride. They've built something remarkable, Cordelia admitted. Love is the strongest foundation, Phoenix replied wisely. Everything else is just beautiful architecture around it. As the celebration continued into the night, Lyndon led Josephine to a quiet corner of the garden. The Genesis Tower rose behind them, while their new family center was visible in the distance, symbols of their past and future standing together on the Chicago skyline. "Do you remember what you said to me in this exact spot 6 years ago?" he asked, holding her close. "That the most beautiful things come from taking risks." Josephine smiled, reaching up to caress his face. "You were right," he murmured, kissing her softly. "Every risk led us here to this perfect moment. Their sons found them there as they always did, completing their family circle." The four of them stood together, looking out over the city they had helped shape, ready to begin their next chapter. Some love stories take detours, but the heart always knows its true destination. For Lyndon and Josephine, that destination was here, in a rooftop garden where dreams had first taken flight, surrounded by the family they had built together. Under the same stars that had witnessed their beginning, the twins had ended their wedding ceremony design with an inscription carved into the arch's foundation: "Love is the greatest architect of all." As they stood together, a family finally whole, they knew that no building they could design would ever be as beautiful as the life they had built together. Subscribe if you liked.